OBOA members. Ooh, yes, it is. For providing the training on emergency vehicle load postings. Please remember to put any questions or comments you have in the chat box, and the instructors will address them as they come. And there will be a survey at the end to receive a certificate and ICC credit for this Lunch and Learn. The link will be placed into the chat, and certificates will come out today or tomorrow. Some upcoming training I'd like to share with everyone. OBOA's Winter QBM is February 28th at the Marion County Public Works Office in Salem. It will be a building and fire collaboration. OFMA will have their annual business meeting May 19th through the 22nd at River House in Bend. Some classes include ICC's Essential Skills for Rising Leaders, NFPA's 1730, this is a long title, Standard for Organization and Deployment of Fire Prevention Inspection and Code Enforcement Plan Review, Investigation and Public Education Operations, and then also the ORSAP Building Safety Evaluator Training. It's a Oregon Safety Assessment Program on earthquakes and other natural disasters. With that, I turn it over to John. Thanks again.
Hello. Hi, I'm John Rooper. I'm the Senior Load Rating Engineer for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Trying to get my presentation up and running here. Are you guys able to see the slide?
Looks great.
Okay. All right. So basically who we are, I was going to co-present with my manager, Joel Booth, today, who's our state bridge operations engineer plus our unit manager. He got called out and had to go inspect a structure out in the Dalles today, so I'm going to be solo presenting now. Basically, we're with the Oregon Department of Transportation Bridge Engineering Section. We're part of the Bridge Operations Unit. We're responsible to maintain the inventory, existing bridges, and the bridge inspection program for the state of Oregon, in accordance with the National Bridge Inspection Standards, or NBIS. We're responsible for all state and local agency bridges. We have most of the state bridges are inspected statewide through our regional bridge inspection staff. Then for local agency bridges, we consult out most of those services through engineering consultants throughout the state. We do not provide these services for privately owned structures that do not carry a public road. We're federally mandated to do this for all public bridges, but whoops, just lost my presentation here. What happened? And how do I get it back on my screen? There we go. Okay. So what we do is required by federal law. National Bridge Inspection Standards is basically established for the safety inspection of highway bridges throughout the United States for all public bridges. This is basically required by the United States Code, which is the general and permanent laws of the United States. And a lot of that is prescribed in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is basically how to implement those laws and the interpretation of those laws. So a lot of what I'm given here is basically right out of federal regulations and law here. So the first thing is, what is a bridge? That's what I'm concerned about and what we're required to look at. And the legal federal definition of a bridge is, law language here, but the main thing to make it that what we're mandated to inspect and load rate for is any structures that are open to a public road, that carry a public road, that have a span length of greater than 20 feet. To simplify this, looking at these diagrams, if you have a structure here, like in the upper left, if that span length is greater than 20 feet, or if it's multiple spans, if the outer edges of that structure and the clear distance of the span is 20 feet, or greater than 20 feet, it's a bridge. Same way for culvert-like structures, like the other diagrams are buried structures. If the out-to-out opening of the structure, even multiple pipes and everything, if it's greater than 20 feet, we have to treat it like a bridge. Those structures are inventoried, inspected, and load rated per federal regulations. This is just reiterating that even, culverts that are basically out a bridge length are included as a bridge inventory. Structures that do not meet this National Bridge Inspection Standard definition of a bridge, we do not inspect them. We don't have to load rate them. So basically anything that's 20 feet or less and doesn't carry a public road is kind of unknown. We don't keep inventory of that. We don't look at their conditions. So I know there's a lot of private structures out there, and I know some fire districts, if the private bridge owners don't have the bridge inspected and load rated, a lot of fire crews won't cross it. I've had some private owners contact me after the fact, upset that the fire crews didn't cross their bridge and didn't know that that was even a requirement. And I have to do a little education, but it's not our responsibility. It's up to the bridge owners to provide that for their own bridges. So, a load rating. What is a load rating? Basically, it's the engineering analysis that determines the safe load capacity of a bridge to carry the vehicles, and that is supplemented by measurements, taken out in the field and for the inspection to get the current condition of the structures. Because over time, structures do deteriorate, take damage, and everything else, and we have to incorporate those into the load rating analysis. That's different from a load inspection. A lot of people confuse a load rating and a load posting. What the load posting is the actual signs on the structure that follow state and local laws here that basically lists what the maximum vehicle load can carry that the bridge can safely carry. That is different from a load rating. The load rating is the analysis. The load posting is if it doesn't meet legal load limits, what the vehicle has to be load posted or the bridge has to be load posted. And again, this is all citing federal law here. Again, we're talking public roads. Any road or street under jurisdiction of maintained by a public authority and open to public travel. And then here's the definition of what a public authority is. A lot of people are like, is this road, they argue, it's a public road, anybody can drive on it. Well, it's, not the road might not be maintained or owned or operated by a public authority, so it becomes a private structure. So, you know, that's outside of my area of trying to decide which roadways are public and private because it comes on who's maintaining and operating that roadway. So, um, now here for the real meat and potatoes of it here. We're getting into the posting signs and how does that pertain to emergency vehicles? Um, in Oregon, if usually when we have a bridge that can't carry, 15 tons or less, we may use a single tonnage load posting sign. Um, by federal regulations, any bridge that can't carry a minimum of 3 tons has to be closed and barricaded. So anywhere between 3 tons to 15 tons, you may see a bridge with one of these signs. This is applying to all vehicles, including emergency vehicles, have to adhere to this load posting. Oftentimes you may see signs with 3 silhouettes of trucks on there. The very top silhouette is a load posting applies to all single unit vehicles, which would apply to all emergency vehicles. So, some people make the mistake of trying to count the number of wheels on the vehicle and all that. That doesn't, these are federal silhouettes in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices that are defined there. And the silhouettes is just a representation. So that top silhouette is for all single unit vehicles, regardless of how many wheels or axles it has. The other two silhouettes, the middle one is for all tractor trailer vehicles. And then the very bottom silhouette is to all loaded trucks pulling a loaded trailer, separate loaded trailer behind the truck. So, if an emergency vehicle meets one of those definitions, you'd most likely have to follow it, but I'm not aware of any tractor trailer or, you know, any vehicles that, meet those definitions, but they might be out there. I'm just not aware of any. So we also have signs here that look like this. The top silhouette again applies to all single unit vehicles with two or three axles. Because you see below that top silhouette, we're listing four, five, six to seven axles, and I'll explain what those are in a little bit here. But the top silhouette or the top load posting applies to all single units with two or three axles, including emergency vehicles. This next set of load postings applies to specialized hauling vehicles. And what these are, SHVs are single unit vehicles with the multiple drop axles that raise and lower for weight, like your modern dump trucks and concrete trucks that have these different axles that can raise and lower. Here's some examples of what those look like. A few years ago, they weren't as popular, but you usually see a lot of these, near urban centers now for short range delivery type vehicles. Um, and basically we had standards for legal axle weights, and the industry was basically able to engineer or reverse engineer those laws to say, hey, if we add more axles to a vehicle, we can carry more weight in these shorter vehicles, so and still be considered legal. So that's how these things came around. Um, if an emergency vehicle has these drop axles, then they need to follow the load postings for these SHVs because that's going to be basically defined for that type of vehicle. I'm not aware of any of these in Oregon that are operating as an emergency vehicle, but if by chance there are, then they need to adhere to these load postings for that section of the load posting sign. And again, the bottom two silhouettes are like before, tractor trailers and loaded trucks pulling a loaded trailer. Also in Oregon, we have several bridges that only require load postings just for the specialized hauling vehicles. And we've developed these different signs to post for either all, the different SHV configurations or for whichever ones that are actually need to be load posted. So, and again, if an emergency vehicle meets any of these definitions and has that many of axles with all the drop axles, they would have to adhere to one of these load posting signs. And then we get into the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which President Obama signed into law just before he left office. Basically, it made emergency vehicles that have heavier than legal axle weights be considered a legal vehicle on an interstate and within reasonable access to an interstate, which is defined as 1 road mile from an interstate. So basically what that required was any bridge that's on an interstate or within 1 mile of interstate had to be load rated for these FAST Act emergency vehicles, and if necessary, load posted for them. This slide in here is just a quick comparison of what that single unit vehicle that we normally analyze in our load ratings. This is a 3-axle vehicle with legal axle loads. A legal axle load for a single axle is 20,000 pounds, and tandem axles have 34,000 pounds. And again, the vehicle that top silhouette is what this vehicle is representing on those load posting signs. It's basically a 25-ton vehicle that we're analyzing because it meets those legal axle weights. The FAST Act basically gave us two different vehicle models, a two-vehicle emergency vehicle, which is called the EV2. The front steer axle is 24,000 pounds, which is greater than the 20,000 pound legal axle weight. Saw a question pop up here about clarifying what a ton is. 1 ton is equal to 2,000 pounds. So, you take any, whatever 1,000 pounds, like 20,000 pounds, that's 10 tons. So your legal axle weights for a single axle is actually a 10 ton or 20,000 pounds. Tandem axles is when you have two tires or two axles closely spaced, like, within 4 feet for the back, usually the back drive axles. The legal axle weight of that tandem axle is 34,000 pounds. This FAST Act emergency vehicle has a drive axle single axle weight of 33,500 pounds. That's almost the same weight as what a legal tandem axle is allowed. So the FAST Act, puts quite a bit more load or allows for quite a bit more load to be applied to these emergency vehicles above what legal load limits allow. Whoops, let me go back. Then the second vehicle model that they came out was the EV3, which is a three-axle emergency vehicle. This is supposed to be representative of aerial ladder fire trucks. Um, and this one, again, the steer axle is 24,000 pounds, which is heavier than legal, but that back tandem axle is now 62,000 pounds. That is a large increase over the 34,000 pound tandem axle because normally each of those back two tires are for a legal vehicle is only allowed to carry 17,000 pounds, and each of those back two tires on this model is allowed to carry 31,000 pounds. That is a very large concentrated load over a very small footprint for those back two axles. um, Expanding on that, those last two axles being 62,000 pounds is the same as the entire gross weight of this five axle dump truck, which is a five axle SHV. That in that diagram below the dump truck here is what those legal axle weights are for those different drop axles and the permanent axles on that to meet the legal axle weights. And that 62,000 pounds for that dump truck is spread out over 22 feet, where that same concentrated load is, just placed within 4 feet on the emergency vehicle. So, what I'm trying to emphasize here, put simply, is weight distribution puts a lot different stresses on bridges. Looking at this diagram here, if you have an 80,000 pound truck that's very long and the load is spread out, only the bridge only sees a portion of that load as it's spread out when a truck is driving over it versus the bottom picture there. You put all that load in a very short footprint of a truck. The bridge has to carry more of that load and puts more stress on the different bridge members. So, why are we focusing on emergency vehicles with that? Looking at the history of most of the bridges that have been built in the state of Oregon between 1930s to 1990s, from the 30s and 40s, the design vehicles, this upper left vehicle, is a 15-ton two-axle vehicle, and that's what was used for most of the bridges. I mean, for all bridges that were designed between the 1930s and 40s. And we still have a lot of bridges in the state, especially on the highway system, that were built to that criteria. Then from the 1940s to the 1990s, the design standards changed and they used a three-axle truck represented by this diagram here that was 36 tons. So now we have like the three-axle emergency vehicle is now 43 tons, a lot more heavier, plus that back tandem axle has that concentrated load that's significantly higher than what a lot of the bridges were even designed for. Put this slide in just as a comparison, because we're talking tons. A lot of people don't understand, well, how does that correlate to other traffic on the roadways? So this diagram kind of gives an illustration between, your average pickups and cars and buses and everything else. You can see how these vehicles kind of compare. So your average fire truck is between 19 and 30 tons, as shown in the diagram. But then the fast stacked vehicles, which I kind of shown below the diagram here, are, the two-axle fast stacked emergency vehicle is almost 29 tons with those heavier than legal axle weights. And that EV3 is 43 tons in comparison. So this is just kind of a quick illustration on how these vehicles kind of compare to emergency vehicles and the fast act vehicles. So since the FAST Act required us to load rate and post for these vehicles, in Oregon we created these two signs because some bridges required that both emergency vehicle models had to be load posted on or near the interstate. And some bridges with that really heavy tandem axle, the three-axle emergency vehicle, some bridges only need that three-axle emergency vehicle to be load posted for. So that's why there's a difference between these two signs. And again, we started using these signs on all state and local bridges within a mile of an interstate. And there's some bridges out there that need to be posted for standard legal vehicles and for the fast act emergency vehicles. So you may see some bridges. This is a real posting sign from a bridge in our state. Um, so if you have an SHV type vehicle, we have to follow the SHV load postings. But even though that top silhouette was up there at 20 tons for, most single unit vehicles with two or three axles, if you're a two axle emergency vehicle, since we have a separate emergency vehicle load posting sign down here, the two axle emergency vehicles would follow the lower sign for 22 tons. And likewise for the three axle emergency vehicles, they need to adhere to the three axle emergency vehicle. Some question why the emergency vehicles can be so much heavier than what a normal legal vehicle is because the legal vehicles are oftentimes we're looking at multiple lanes loaded of those legal vehicles. And so the distribution of multiple lanes loaded of those trucks will require a lowered posted weight for those vehicles. Where emergency vehicle federal law has dictated that we only need to analyze a single emergency vehicle crossing a bridge at a time. So we're instead of looking at multiple lanes of those emergency vehicles crossing a bridge, we're only looking at a single truck as crossing during an emergency situation. So that's why you can see that these, two axle and three axle emergency vehicles have a higher load posting than what the other legal vehicles do. Hopefully that makes sense. I just grabbed some different examples here. This one was a unique case because I didn't think anything of it, but then the more I started thinking about it, this bridge actually only needed to be load posted for the three axle fast act emergency vehicles, but it also needed to be load posted for all other legal vehicles. Um, so, I kind of checked in with our Commerce and Compliance Division and over-dimensional permit staff trying to say, hey, would our enforcement folks look, being that this bridge is signed like this, you know, what is the expectation here? And way this bridge is signed, the two axle emergency vehicles would have to adhere to that top silhouette sign for 25 tons. Even though technically our intent was to allow the two axle fast act emergency vehicles can go up to 28 tons. Um, so, the intent, if enforcement wanted to enforce this, that this would be what you would have to, all the two axle emergency vehicles would have to adhere to that 25-ton posting sign. Again, SHVs would have to follow the SHVs, then the three axle emergency vehicles would follow the emergency vehicle sign. A simple way of fixing that is we could just go ahead and add the two axle to the emergency vehicle sign and increase the load posting for that on there, which might be something we do here in the future. But there is currently a bridge out there that's posted this way. And based on the interpretation of our enforcement folks, this is how emergency vehicles should be following it. So I kind of threw this as a one-off out there as an example of, hopefully this isn't making it too confusing, but based on how signs are posted, this is how the enforcement folks expect it to be adhered to. For this situation, we have a bridge that's only needed to be posted for SHVs and the three axle emergency vehicles. So in this case, it's easy to say two axle emergency vehicles are not load restricted for this bridge because the top sign isn't calling out two, three, or four axle single unit vehicles. If an emergency vehicle has 5 to 7 axles, they have to follow that top sign, and three axle emergency vehicles have to follow the bottom sign. And so basically the question comes, what happens if or when an emergency vehicle becomes or matches a specialized hauling vehicle? Um, Most of the load rate with the emergency vehicle drop axles have heavier than legal axle weights. Most of us would think no, because the whole reason of having drop axles is for that truck to be allowed to meet legal axle weights. But is there anything stopping it? I came across this YouTube video that kind of showcased this heavy rescue emergency vehicle that Los Angeles County Fire District has, and it's basically a crane, and it has a drop axle here, making it look like a four axle specialized hauling vehicle. In that video, which you can, if you want to look at later at this link, this vehicle has a gross vehicle weight of 73,800 pounds on four axles. A normal four axle SHV that meets legal axle weights can only weigh 56,000 pounds. So obviously, this emergency vehicle can't has heavier than legal axle weights, even with a drop axle. So I don't know what rules or how they're being applied. If they just say, hey, per FAST Act, we can have heavier than legal axle weights. I'm not sure if there's an actual equation in there that tells them what those weights are can be, but they're getting away with it down there for this. I don't know if we have any of these types of vehicles in the state of Oregon. I know my manager's hoping we never get anything like this, and I kind of agree, but it puts a lot of load on bridges with these concentrated loads. So, um, going back to the FAST Act, again, this made these vehicles legal on the interstate or within reasonable access of the interstate. So we're required by federal law to post and, to load rate and post for these vehicles on those bridges, as I stated previously. But what about the rest of the bridges that are farther from an interstate? I mean, these vehicles don't magically grow wings and fly away. How, there's really no requirement federally that makes these, that says we have to look at those. It's basically up to each state to determine how we handle those for those bridges away from the interstate. Um, so, we have a per special permit, these vehicles are allowed to operate within Oregon. Unfortunately, our motor carrier or commerce compliance division has kind of dropped the ball in the last few years, and we hasn't really um, enforced a lot of the fire districts to get the permits for these vehicles. So we really don't know how many of these vehicles around the state are basically operating here in Oregon. I think our Commerce and Compliance Division is working on rectifying that and doing outreach and getting these vehicles permitted and weighed and everything so we can know how many are in operation. But as of a couple years ago, they were telling us they didn't have an actual count of how many of these vehicles exist. Our Commerce and Compliance Division and ODOT Upper Management was planning to expand the same criteria as the FAST Act to all bridges within the state, to basically all public roadways, making them be considered legal statewide. Um, when they proposed that to our bridge section here, we kind of asked them to hold off on that because federal law requires that once we make these vehicles legal statewide, every bridge will have to be load rated and if necessarily posted for these structures. And we have around 7,000 public bridges in the state of Oregon between state and local agencies. And roughly about half of that inventory has been actually load rated or analyzed for these vehicles. And if we suddenly make these things legal statewide, Federal Highways is going to say, hey, is every bridge rated and posted? And right now, no. So we would basically be non-compliant with federal regulations and be under a plan of corrective action as being non-compliant and basically painting ourselves into a corner of, federal stipulations and everything to meet the requirements to get every bridge rated for them. So we convince upper management to hold off for a few years. As funding allows, we're getting every bridge rated, but it's going to take us a few years to get that done. So in the future, we'll be there, but for right now, we're just not quite there yet. The slide here is showing, we currently just over half of our bridge inventory has been analyzed for these vehicles. Per federal regulations, there was 45 ODOT-owned bridges on or near the interstate that we ended up load posting for FAST Act emergency vehicles. And there was 89 local agency bridges that we load posted that were near the interstates as well. Our ODOT upper management has made the executive decision to load post all ODOT owned bridges within the state of Oregon for these emergency vehicles as we get them load rated. So currently we have another 345 bridges that are owned by ODOT across the state that have been load posted for these emergency vehicles. So you're probably seeing a lot more of these emergency vehicle load posting signs around the state, especially away from the interstates. And this is why. As of right now, on local agency bridges, they don't have to load post for these emergency vehicles because they're not considered a legal vehicle. It's a permitted vehicle. And we can't force them to load post for these vehicles until they become considered a legal vehicle throughout the state. So at this point, there's around 725 local agency bridges that probably should be load posted for them, but we cannot legally force the local agencies to load post for these vehicles. Um, and so basically, it has to be handled through the permitting system, and how that's being done, I cannot say, to be honest. To help mitigate some of this in the future, we've added the three-axle emergency vehicle to the Oregon Bridge Design Manual. So all new bridges are being designed with this vehicle, and any bridges that require strengthening for, legal or permit trucks, they also have to make sure their strengthening designs also pass for this three-axle emergency vehicle as well. So hopefully in the future we'll have less and less bridges that may end up rating out low because we're designing for these vehicles now, where never before these load effects were looked at when we were designing or strengthening bridges. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. If there's any questions. Okay.
All right. Anyone, if you have any questions or you think of any questions for John, just go ahead and email myself, Laura Ratcliffe, or Jessica with OFMA, and we'll get the question to John. And we really appreciate you taking your lunch hour to speak with all of us. It was super helpful. I know I'm going to be taking this to my training chief. This might be something great for the crews if they don't know already some of these nuances that you provided. I know we have several state highways and freeways going through Albany, so quite a few bridges here. Just for everyone that attended, please remember to take the survey at the end. The link to it will be in the chat box. And again, certificates will go out today or tomorrow. Let's see, I'm just looking at the chat. Oh, there it is. Again, thank you all for attending, and special thanks to John Rooper. We really appreciate it. And give your coworker Joel a little bit of crap.
Not a problem. And again, if any of you guys, have questions on load posting signs, that are, within your guys' areas, feel free to reach out to me or Joel, and, we can answer any questions or help, clarify things. So.
And John also provided the PowerPoint to us, so we'll be providing that to everyone who attended as well. And again, this was recorded, so if we want the recording as well, we will have it. Thanks again, John. Appreciate it.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.